The thick, humid air of New Orleans wrapped around me like a damp blanket as I stepped out of the cab. The city had always fascinated me, its blend of culture, the pulse of the French Quarter, and of course, its reputation as one of the most haunted places in the world. But this trip was different. It wasn't just the music and food that had drawn me here. I came for the ghosts. I paused for a moment, staring up at the grand, ornate facade of the Hotel Monteleone. Its ironwork balconies and towering presence loomed above me, a testament to the city's rich history. Built in 1886, the hotel had survived over a century of change, yet it stood proudly amidst the modern world. It was more than a hotel. It was a landmark, a place where time seemed to stand still. And of course, it was haunted. I'd heard the stories, the mysterious cold spots, the apparitions of former guests, and the eerie feeling of being watched. Some even said the legendary voodoo queen, Marie Laveau, made her presence known here, despite the hotel having no direct connection to her life. The idea of staying at such a storied place thrilled me, even as a small, uneasy feeling began to creep into my chest. I wasn't usually one to believe in ghosts. I enjoyed ghost stories and urban legends as much as the next person, but I was always the skeptic in the group, the one who'd laugh off a creaking floorboard as just the building settling. But something about the Hotel Monteleone felt different. It was as if the walls themselves whispered secrets from another time. After checking in, I stood in the lobby for a few moments, letting the atmosphere sink in. The air felt heavy here, thick with the weight of countless stories and memories. The marble floors gleamed under the glow of the chandelier, casting intricate reflections that danced across the surface like phantoms. I couldn't shake the feeling that the hotel was alive somehow, watching, waiting. I took the elevator to the 9th floor, where my room awaited me. The hallway stretched out long and narrow, the carpet muffling my footsteps as I approached room 914. I hesitated for a moment, the key card heavy in my hand, as if some invisible force wanted me to turn around and leave. But that was absurd, I thought, shaking off the feeling. With a quick swipe of the card, the door clicked open. The room was beautiful, tastefully decorated in warm tones, with an antique charm that felt distinctly New Orleans. A large window looked out over the city, the lights of the French Quarter twinkling in the distance. The bed was inviting, the soft comforter perfectly smooth, as if it had been untouched for years. I placed my suitcase on the luggage stand and sank into the armchair by the window, trying to unwind from the travel. Yet no matter how hard I tried to relax, I couldn't shake the sense of unease that had been lingering ever since I stepped foot inside the hotel. There was something off about the room. It wasn't just that it was too quiet. It was as though the silence was waiting to be broken by something I couldn't quite explain. A knock on the door startled me, pulling me out of my thoughts. I hadn't been expecting anyone. Heart racing, I crossed the room and opened the door. A small, neatly dressed man stood in the hallway, holding out a brochure with a smile that didn't quite reach his eyes.
Good evening. Welcome to the Hotel Monteleone. If you're interested, we're offering a haunted tour of the hotel tonight. It's quite popular with our guests, especially those looking for a bit of history and perhaps a scare.
I glanced down at the brochure in his hand, the words Haunted Hotel Tour printed in bold, dark letters across the top. A chill ran down my spine. This was it, the moment I'd been waiting for, the chance to explore the very halls where the hotel's ghosts were said to roam. Without hesitating, I took the brochure and nodded. "Sign me up," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. The man handed me a small ticket with the time of the tour printed on it. 9 p.m., just 2 hours away.
Meet in the lobby,
he said with a slight nod, before turning and disappearing down the hall. As the door clicked shut behind me, I couldn't help but feel like I had just agreed to more than I bargained for. I sat back down in the armchair, clutching the brochure in my hands, the words Marie Laveau and Blue Lady leaping off the page. These were the hotel's most famous ghosts, legends in their own right. The idea of seeing them sent a shiver through me, a mixture of excitement and fear. I spent the next hour reading up on the history of the hotel, discovering more about its haunted past. The Hotel Monteleone had become a hotspot for paranormal activity over the years. Guests and staff alike had reported sightings of apparitions, mysterious noises, and cold spots that would appear without warning. The stories were endless: ghost children giggling in empty hallways, the Blue Lady's mournful presence in her tragic search for her lost love, and even strange occurrences in the very room I now occupied. There was something about room 914, I learned, though the details were murky. Some guests claimed they had felt an overwhelming sense of sadness in this room, while others had reported hearing voices in the dead of night. The more I read, the more my curiosity grew, and with it, a sense of dread that I couldn't quite explain. As 9 p.m. drew closer, I prepared for the tour, my heart pounding in anticipation. I made my way back down to the lobby, where a small group of guests had gathered. The guide, a tall man with a southern drawl and a penchant for theatrics, introduced himself as Martin. His dark, slicked-back hair and black trench coat made him look like he belonged in a Gothic novel.
Welcome, ladies and gentlemen.
Martin began, his voice low and dripping with drama.
Tonight, we're going to explore the dark and haunted history of the Hotel Monteleone. This place has seen more than its fair share of tragedies, and it seems that some of the souls who experienced those tragedies never quite managed to leave.
The group exchanged nervous glances, but I couldn't help the grin that tugged at my lips. This was exactly what I had come here for. The thrill of the unknown, the chance to walk among the ghosts of the past. Martin led us through the hotel, his voice echoing off the walls as he recounted the many stories of the ghosts that called the Monteleone home. We passed through the grand ballroom, where the faint sound of music was sometimes heard late at night, despite the room being empty. We ventured down narrow hallways, the air growing colder with each step, as if the walls themselves were breathing. Finally, we arrived at the 9th floor, where Martin paused outside room 930, the infamous haunted room where the ghost child was said to reside. My breath caught in my throat as he described the tragic story of the young boy who had disappeared under mysterious circumstances, only to return in the afterlife, forever bound to the hotel's halls.
This floor is particularly active,
Martin whispered, his eyes narrowing as he stared down the long hallway.
If you listen closely, you might just hear him.
The air was heavy with silence, the group frozen in place as we strained to hear something, anything. For a moment, there was nothing but the quiet hum of the hotel's distant sounds. And then, faintly, like the softest breath of wind, I heard it, a giggle. A child's giggle drifting down the hall, sending a cold rush through my body.
Come play with me.
I turned to look at Martin, but he simply smiled as if he had expected it all along.
The hotel has its ways of reminding us that it's never truly empty.
As we continued the tour, I couldn't shake the feeling that something or someone was watching us. The shadows seemed to grow longer, darker, and the air felt charged, as though the hotel itself was alive with the energy of the past. When the tour finally ended, I returned to my room, my mind racing with everything I had seen and heard. I lay in bed staring at the ceiling, the weight of the night pressing down on me. The hotel was quiet, but I knew better now. It was never truly silent here. I closed my eyes, but sleep didn't come easily. Instead, I drifted between dreams and reality, haunted by the stories of the Monteleone's ghosts. And just as I was about to slip into sleep, I heard it again, a soft knock on my door. The knock echoed in my mind long after it faded into silence. I sat up in bed, staring at the door as my heart pounded in my chest. A part of me wanted to open it, wanted to believe that it was nothing more than an overactive imagination, or perhaps one of the other guests playing a prank. But something inside me knew better. The knock hadn't been loud nor aggressive. It was soft, deliberate, like the gentle tap of a child asking for permission to enter. I swallowed hard, gripping the edges of the blanket as if that could somehow protect me from whatever lay beyond the door. I listened for a few moments, waiting, hoping the knock would come again so I could convince myself it had been nothing. But there was only silence. I glanced at the clock. It was just after midnight. The ghost tour had ended hours ago, but the memories of what I'd seen and heard still clung to me, refusing to fade with the night. The hotel had come alive during that tour. I could feel it. The long, dark hallways had buzzed with unseen energy. The whispers, the cold spots, the distant giggle of a child, all of it had wrapped around me like the heavy New Orleans air, suffocating me with a sense of dread I couldn't shake. I swung my legs over the side of the bed, the hardwood floor cold against my bare feet. The room felt different now, as if the walls were closing in, the shadows in the corners growing darker, longer. I stood and walked to the door, pausing for a moment with my hand hovering over the doorknob. Should I open it? My instinct screamed no, but curiosity won out. I unlocked the door and slowly pulled it open, peering out into the empty hallway. It was deserted. The soft yellow glow from the wall sconces cast eerie shadows along the carpet, but there was no sign of anyone. No footsteps retreating down the hall, no ghostly figure waiting in the distance, just silence. I let out a shaky breath and closed the door, locking it again before retreating to my bed. As I pulled the covers back over me, I couldn't help but wonder, had I imagined the knock? Or was it the ghost child from room 930 playing his mischievous games? Sleep, when it finally came, was restless. My dreams were a tangled web of the stories I'd heard on the tour. Marie Laveau's piercing eyes staring back at me from the shadows. The blue lady's mournful figure drifting down the hallway. The soft echo of a child's laughter, chasing me through the endless corridors of the hotel. I awoke several times throughout the night, drenched in sweat, unsure if what I had experienced had been real or a figment of my imagination. The next morning, the hotel's grandeur seemed almost mocking, as if it had returned to its stately elegance, hiding the secrets of the night behind its polished exterior. Sunlight streamed through the large windows of the lobby, casting everything in a warm golden hue, but I couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. I made my way downstairs to the hotel's cafe for a quick breakfast. My mind was buzzing with thoughts of the night before, replaying every detail from the tour. I wasn't alone in my curiosity. Several of the other guests from the tour were seated around the cafe, murmuring quietly to each other. Their hushed voices and wide-eyed glances told me they had experienced something too. As I sipped my coffee, I noticed Martin, our ghost tour guide, sitting at the far end of the cafe, his eyes scanning the room as if he too was a part of the hotel's strange charm. I decided to approach him, hoping he could provide some answers to the questions that had been plaguing me since last night. "Good morning," I said as I approached his table. He looked up, his expression unreadable.
Morning. How'd you sleep?
I hesitated for a moment, unsure of how much I should share. "Not well," I admitted, sliding into the seat across from him. "There was a knock on my door, late last night. No one was there when I opened it." Martin didn't seem surprised. If anything, he looked amused.
Room 914. You're in one of the active rooms.
"Active?" I raised an eyebrow, leaning in closer. "You didn't mention that on the tour."
There are some things we don't mention during the public tours. The hotel likes to keep certain aspects of its hauntings under wraps. Let's just say room 914 has its own story, separate from the others. The knock you heard? You're not the first guest to experience it.
I felt a chill crawl down my spine. So, it wasn't just in my head? Martin shook his head, his eyes gleaming with something I couldn't quite place. Was it excitement or something darker?
No, it wasn't. Room 914 is special. The hotel has a way of choosing its guests. It's always been that way. The spirits here, they're not tied to just one room. They wander, and sometimes they find someone they connect with.
I frowned, trying to make sense of his words. Why me? He leaned back in his chair, his eyes never leaving mine.
That's the question, isn't it? Why does the hotel choose certain people? Why do the ghosts latch onto some guests and leave others alone? I've been guiding tours here for years, and I still don't know the answer. But I've seen it happen time and time again. Guests come in, expecting nothing more than a ghost story, and they leave with something else.
His words unsettled me. I hadn't come to the Hotel Monteleone expecting anything more than a spooky story to tell my friends back home. But now, I was starting to wonder if I had been wrong to take this trip so lightly.
I suggest you keep your eyes and ears open during your stay. This hotel is full of secrets, and not all of them are friendly.
I spent the rest of the day exploring the city, trying to shake the eerie feeling that had settled over me. The lively streets of New Orleans were a stark contrast to the oppressive atmosphere of the hotel. Jazz music poured out of every open doorway, and the scent of beignets and gumbo filled the air. But no matter how much I tried to immerse myself in the vibrant energy of the French Quarter, my thoughts kept drifting back to the hotel. By the time I returned to the Monteleone that evening, the sun had set, and the hotel had transformed once again into the haunted relic I had experienced the night before. The shadows seemed longer, the air thicker. I made my way up to my room, my steps slow and deliberate, as if I was walking through a dream. The hallway on the 9th floor was eerily quiet, just as it had been the night before. I couldn't shake the feeling of being watched, as though unseen eyes were following my every move. As I reached room 914, I hesitated for a moment before unlocking the door. My heart was pounding in my chest as I stepped inside. The room was just as I had left it, neat, tidy, with the bed made and the curtains drawn back to reveal the city skyline. But there was something off, something I couldn't quite put my finger on. The air felt wrong. I crossed the room and sat down in the armchair by the window, staring out at the twinkling lights of the French Quarter below. The city was alive, buzzing with energy, but up here in this room it felt as though time had stopped. The silence pressed in around me, and I couldn't help but feel that I wasn't alone. And then, just as I was about to turn on the television to drown out the quiet, I heard it again, the knock, soft, deliberate, coming from the door. The same knock I had heard the night before. My breath caught in my throat as I stood, heart racing, and crossed the room to the door. I placed my hand on the doorknob, hesitating for a moment, before slowly pulling it open. The hallway was empty, no footsteps, no retreating figure, just the long, narrow corridor stretching out before me. I stepped out into the hall, looking both ways, but there was no sign of anyone. And yet, I couldn't shake the feeling that someone or something had been there. As I turned to go back into my room, I caught a glimpse of something out of the corner of my eye. A figure, small and fleeting, standing at the far end of the hallway. It was only for a moment, but I could have sworn I saw a child, dressed in old-fashioned clothes, staring back at me. And just as quickly as I had seen it, the figure was gone. I stood frozen in place, my mind racing with 1,000 thoughts. Was it the ghost child Martin had spoken about, or was it something else entirely? I closed the door behind me, locking it tight, but I knew it wouldn't make a difference. Whatever was haunting the Hotel Monteleone had chosen me, and there was no escaping it now. I barely slept that night, the image of the ghostly child lingering in the corners of my mind, his fleeting presence haunting my thoughts. Every creak of the floorboards, every whisper of wind against the window seemed amplified in the darkness, as though the very walls of the hotel were alive, shifting and breathing around me. It felt like the spirits were inching closer, drawing me deeper into their world. By the time morning arrived, I was exhausted, but I couldn't bring myself to leave. Something about the hotel, about its haunted history and the strange connection I seemed to have with it, kept me rooted in place. I had to know more. I had to understand what was happening here. I found myself wandering through the lobby after breakfast, drawn to the rich mahogany counters and ornate chandeliers that glistened in the soft morning light. It was hard to believe that such a beautiful, luxurious place could be the site of so much tragedy, so much pain. As I browsed the brochures and pamphlets at the concierge desk, one name kept jumping out at me: Marie Laveau. Her legend was everywhere, from the voodoo shops in the French Quarter to the whispers of tourists eager to catch a glimpse of her spirit. And though she had no direct connection to the hotel, many claimed that her ghost was one of the most active presences here, wandering the halls, watching, waiting. I decided to investigate further. There had to be a reason why her spirit had chosen this place as one of its many haunts. The idea both fascinated and unnerved me. Marie Laveau had been one of the most powerful and feared women in New Orleans, a queen of voodoo whose influence had extended far beyond her lifetime. And now she was said to still walk among the living, her spirit lingering in the places where her magic had once thrived. Later that afternoon, I signed up for a private walking tour focused on the life and legend of Marie Laveau. The guide, a woman named Clarice, met me just outside the hotel's grand entrance, her dark braided hair and brightly colored beads adding a touch of mysticism to her otherwise casual attire. There was something about her eyes, sharp, intelligent, and knowing, that made me feel like she saw more than most people, as if she could see through the veil that separated the living from the dead.
Marie Laveau is everywhere in New Orleans.
Clarice said as we began our walk through the French Quarter.
Her spirit, her energy, it still runs through the streets, through the people. She was more than just a voodoo queen. She was a protector, a healer, and she had a power that most people couldn't understand.
We walked in silence for a while, the sounds of the city buzzing around us as Clarice led me deeper into the history of Marie Laveau. She told me about Laveau's early life, how she had risen to prominence as a voodoo priestess, helping the people of New Orleans with everything from healing and blessings to more complex matters. But it wasn't just her magic that made her legendary. It was her charisma, her ability to unite people from all walks of life.
She was a powerful woman in life.
Clarice continued, her voice dropping to a whisper as we approached St. Louis Cemetery No. 1, the final resting place of Marie Laveau.
And in death, she's become something even more. People come here to ask for favors, to leave offerings, hoping that her spirit will grant them their wishes.
We stopped at her tomb, a large whitewashed structure covered in X's, symbols left by visitors who had come seeking her favor. Candles, flowers, and trinkets were scattered around the base of the tomb, the air thick with the scent of incense.
This is where her power is strongest. But her spirit, it doesn't stay here. It moves. Some say they've seen her in the French Quarter. Others claim she visits certain places around the city, drawn to the energy of those places.
Like the Hotel Monteleone? I asked, unable to hide my curiosity. Clarice's eyes flicked toward me, her expression unreadable.
The Monteleone is one of those places. No one knows why for sure, but her spirit is drawn to it. Some say it's because of the energy there, the people who've stayed, the things that have happened. Others believe it's because of the ley lines.
Ley lines? I repeated, the unfamiliar term catching me off guard.
They're invisible lines of energy that run through the earth. Some places, like New Orleans, sit at the intersection of these lines, which creates a powerful pull for spirits and other supernatural entities. The Monteleone is built on one of these intersections, and it's believed that's why so many spirits linger there, including Marie Laveau.
The idea sent a chill down my spine. Was that why I had been drawn to the hotel? Was it more than just a fascination with its haunted history? Had I been pulled there by something I didn't fully understand?
Be careful while you're staying at the Monteleone. The spirits there aren't just memories of the past, they're aware, they interact. And Marie Laveau, especially, is drawn to those who are open to her energy.
I returned to the hotel with a sense of unease gnawing at the edges of my mind. The thought of Marie Laveau's spirit being drawn to me, to my energy, made me feel vulnerable in a way I hadn't before. I had come to the Hotel Monteleone seeking a thrill, a brush with the supernatural, but now it felt like I was in over my head. As I stepped into the lobby, the air felt heavier than it had earlier that day, as though the hotel itself had shifted in my absence. I made my way to the elevator, pressing the button for the 9th floor, and as the doors slid shut, a strange sensation washed over me, like a weight pressing down on my chest. It was subtle at first, but by the time the elevator reached my floor, it had grown almost unbearable. When the doors opened, the hallway was eerily quiet, the lights flickering slightly as I stepped out. I walked slowly down the hall, my footsteps muffled by the thick carpet, but the oppressive feeling didn't leave me. It only grew stronger as I approached my room, room 914. The number seemed to taunt me, as if the door itself was waiting for me to open it, daring me to face whatever lay inside. I hesitated for a moment, my hand hovering over the key card before sliding it into the lock. The door clicked open, and I stepped inside. The room was dim, the curtains drawn tight against the fading light outside. But it wasn't the darkness that bothered me. It was the air, the way it felt thick, charged with something I couldn't see. And then I noticed the faint scent of incense. It was subtle but unmistakable, lingering in the air like a memory. My pulse quickened as I crossed the room, my eyes scanning every corner, every shadow. I couldn't shake the feeling that I wasn't alone. And then, out of the corner of my eye, I saw it. A figure, tall, dark, and unmistakably feminine, standing near the window, her back turned to me. Her presence was both commanding and eerie, the air around her humming with energy. My breath caught in my throat as I realized who it was. Marie Laveau. I froze, my mind racing with disbelief and fear. She didn't move, didn't acknowledge my presence, but I could feel her watching me, even though her back was turned. The room seemed to pulse with energy, as though her mere presence was altering the space around us. For a long moment, I didn't dare move. I was rooted to the spot, staring at the ghostly figure that had appeared in my room, wondering what I should do. My mind screamed at me to leave, to run, but my body refused to obey. And then, as suddenly as she had appeared, she was gone. The air seemed to rush back into the room, and I collapsed into the armchair, my heart pounding in my chest. My mind struggled to make sense of what had just happened. Had I really seen Marie Laveau's ghost? Or had the stories I'd heard gotten to me, feeding my imagination until it had conjured her out of thin air? But deep down, I knew the truth. I hadn't imagined it. She had been there, her presence undeniable. I sat in the armchair for what felt like hours, my mind replaying the encounter over and over again. I couldn't shake the feeling that Marie Laveau had been trying to tell me something, that her appearance hadn't been a random occurrence. She had come to me for a reason, but what that reason was, I had no idea. The encounter with Marie Laveau's ghost left me rattled in a way I hadn't expected. After all, I had come to New Orleans, to the Hotel Monteleone specifically, seeking out the supernatural. I had wanted to experience something otherworldly. But now that I'd come face to face with one of the most powerful spirits in the city's history, I wasn't sure if I could handle what came next. I spent the rest of the afternoon trying to keep my mind off what had happened, wandering through the French Quarter in a daze, the lively sounds of jazz and laughter doing little to ease the gnawing unease in the pit of my stomach. The streets, usually vibrant and full of energy, seemed distant, muted, as though I were walking through a dream. When I finally returned to the hotel that evening, the sky had darkened, and a soft drizzle had begun to fall, the rain pattering lightly against the windows of the lobby. The warm, golden light inside the Monteleone stood in stark contrast to the gloomy weather outside. But even the hotel's grandeur couldn't calm the sense of dread building inside me. I hesitated in the lobby, glancing up at the grand chandelier hanging from the ceiling, its crystals shimmering in the dim light. The opulence of the hotel suddenly felt oppressive, the weight of its history pressing down on me from all sides. I couldn't help but wonder how many others had walked these same halls, feeling the same invisible presence, the same cold eyes watching them from the shadows. I knew what was waiting for me upstairs, and as much as I didn't want to admit it, I was afraid. The elevator ride to the 9th floor felt interminable. The faint hum of the machinery and the soft clinking of the cables set my nerves on edge. Each floor we passed felt like it was taking me deeper into a place I didn't fully understand, a world where the living and the dead coexisted in a way that defied logic. When the doors finally slid open with a soft ding, the hallway was empty. I stepped out, my footsteps echoing eerily down the long corridor as I made my way toward room 914. The air felt heavy, as if the building itself was holding its breath, waiting for something to happen. I unlocked the door and stepped inside, immediately noticing the difference in the atmosphere. The room was cold, colder than it had any right to be for a warm, humid New Orleans night. I could see my breath in the air, tiny puffs of vapor swirling in front of me as I crossed the threshold. I flipped the light switch, but the lamps didn't respond. The room remained bathed in shadows, the faint glow from the streetlights outside the only source of illumination. My heart began to race as I fumbled for my phone, using the screen to cast a dim light around the room. That's when I noticed it. The mirror on the far wall, tall, ornate, and framed in dark wood, was fogged up as though someone had just taken a hot shower. But I hadn't touched the bathroom, hadn't even turned on the water. My skin prickled as I approached the mirror, holding my phone up to get a better look. And then I saw it. A handprint. Smudged in the condensation on the glass, the outline of a small hand was clearly visible, as if a child had pressed their palm against the surface and dragged it downward. My stomach dropped. The ghost child. It had to be. I backed away from the mirror, my heart pounding so loudly in my chest that I was sure it would wake the spirits. The cold air, the handprint. It was all too much. I wanted to run, to get out of the hotel and never look back. But something inside me kept me rooted to the spot, a mixture of fear and curiosity forcing me to stay. And then, out of the corner of my eye, I saw movement. I spun around, my phone casting shaky shadows on the walls, but there was no one there. Just the same dimly lit room, the curtains rustling softly in the breeze from the slightly open window. But I knew I hadn't imagined it. I'd seen something, a flicker of movement, a shadow, something. The room seemed to grow even colder, and suddenly I heard it. A faint giggle, high-pitched, childlike, coming from somewhere in the room. I whipped around, trying to pinpoint the source, but it seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere at once. My hands trembled as I clutched my phone, the light shaking with my fear. "Hello?" I whispered, though I wasn't sure why. It wasn't like I expected the ghost to answer me. But then it did. The giggle came again, closer this time, followed by the soft sound of footsteps, tiny, bare feet padding across the hardwood floor. My skin broke out in goosebumps, as the sound grew louder, coming toward me. I backed up until I was pressed against the wall, my heart racing as the footsteps stopped right in front of me. I could feel the air shift, the temperature plummeting even further as I stared into the empty space in front of me. And then the whisper came, "Play with me." The voice was soft, almost pleading, and it sent a chill down my spine. I squeezed my eyes shut, willing myself to wake up from this nightmare, but when I opened them again, nothing had changed. I was still there, trapped in the cold, dark room with whatever was haunting it. I don't know how long I stood there, frozen in fear, but eventually the cold began to recede. The air grew warmer, the oppressive presence in the room lifting as though it had never been there at all. But the memory of that voice, the child's voice, was burned into my mind. I knew then that the ghost child wasn't just some legend, some story to entertain the guests. It was real, and it was here. By the time morning arrived, I was a wreck. I hadn't slept a single minute, my mind racing with everything that had happened the night before. The handprint on the mirror, the giggle, the footsteps. None of it felt like a dream, like something my mind had conjured up in the middle of the night. It had been real. I spent the next day in a fog, too rattled to leave the hotel. The lively streets of New Orleans seemed foreign to me now, their charm overshadowed by the dark events that had unfolded in my room. Even the sunlight streaming through the grand windows of the lobby felt out of place, as though it didn't belong in the same world as the shadows that lurked upstairs. I debated leaving the Monteleone, checking out early, and finding somewhere else to stay. But the pull of the hotel was stronger than ever. Something inside me wouldn't let me leave. I had come here seeking answers, seeking an experience, and now that I had found it, I couldn't just walk away. That evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon and the city once again fell into its familiar rhythmic hum, I found myself drawn back to the 9th floor. I told myself it was to retrieve something from my room, but deep down, I knew the truth. I wanted to see the ghost child again. I stepped out of the elevator, the familiar cold air wrapping around me like a shroud. The hallway was quiet, the soft light from the sconces casting long, eerie shadows across the carpet. I approached room 914 slowly, my footsteps hesitant as I neared the door. But before I could reach it, I heard something that stopped me in my tracks. A voice, low, feminine, coming from the other end of the hall. I turned, my heart racing as I strained to hear the words. It was distant, muffled but unmistakable. And then I saw her. A woman dressed in a flowing blue gown, her dark hair cascading down her back, stood at the far end of the hall. Her head was bowed, her figure shimmering faintly in the dim light, as though she were made of mist. The Blue Lady. I had heard about her on the tour. The woman who had died waiting for her lover to return, forever doomed to wander the halls in search of him. I had thought it was just another ghost story. But now, seeing her in front of me, I knew it wasn't. She didn't move, didn't acknowledge my presence. She simply stood there, her head tilted down, as if she were waiting for something or someone. My breath caught in my throat as I took a step forward, compelled by some invisible force to approach her. But before I could get any closer, she faded. One moment she was there, and the next, she was gone, vanishing into the shadows as though she had never been there at all. I stood there for what felt like an eternity, staring at the spot where she had stood, my mind racing with questions I couldn't begin to answer. The Blue Lady, the ghost child, Marie Laveau. There were so many spirits tied to this hotel, so many layers of mystery that I had only just begun to uncover. And I knew then that I wasn't done. Not yet. The image of the Blue Lady dissolving into thin air stayed with me long after she disappeared. But as strange and haunting as that encounter had been, I couldn't get the ghost child out of my mind. There was something about that innocent, pleading voice, the giggle, the faint footsteps, that disturbed me more than anything else. It wasn't just eerie, it felt personal, as though the child was trying to reach out to me, to communicate something I couldn't quite grasp. I needed to understand who he was and why his spirit was trapped here. The following day, I headed down to the hotel's library, a quiet, dimly lit room filled with old books, historical records, and photographs of the Monteleone from decades past. If there was any place to dig deeper into the hotel's history, this was it. I found a small section dedicated to the paranormal, with books about New Orleans hauntings and supernatural phenomena in general. But what really caught my eye was a dusty old ledger tucked into the corner of a shelf, its pages yellowed with age. I pulled the ledger from the shelf, careful not to disturb the fragile binding. It appeared to be an old guest book, with handwritten entries dating back over a century. Many of the names were unfamiliar, guests who had passed through the hotel long before my time. But as I flipped through the pages, something caught my eye. October 1918. A family had checked into the Monteleone, their names scribbled in neat cursive, Josephine and Edward Adams. And then, beneath their names, a third entry, Maurice Adams, aged 7. My heart raced as I stared at the name. A boy, just 7 years old. Could this be the ghost child I had encountered? I continued scanning the pages, hoping to find more information, but the entries for that week ended abruptly. The family's departure wasn't recorded, as though they had vanished without a trace. I felt a chill crawl down my spine. Something had happened to them, something the hotel hadn't wanted to record. I spent the rest of the afternoon poring over old documents and news articles, hoping to uncover more about the Adams family. After hours of searching, I finally found what I had been looking for, a newspaper clipping from late October 1918. The headline read, "Tragedy strikes Hotel Monteleone. Boy goes missing during stay." The article was brief, but the details were enough to confirm my suspicions. Maurice Adams had disappeared during his family's stay at the hotel. According to the report, he had been playing in the hallways when he vanished. Despite a thorough search of the hotel and its surroundings, Maurice was never found. His parents, grief-stricken and heartbroken, had left the hotel shortly afterward, never to return. But Maurice, it seemed that he had never left. I sat back in my chair, the weight of the discovery settling over me. The ghost child haunting the 9th floor, the one who had giggled in the darkness and left his handprint on the mirror, was Maurice. He had been lost for over a century, trapped in the halls of the Monteleone, forever searching for a way home. I couldn't help but feel a deep sadness for him. He was just a child, caught in some terrible limbo, unable to move on. And for reasons I didn't fully understand, he had reached out to me. I wasn't sure if it was because I had shown curiosity in his story, or if it was something deeper. But I knew that I had to do something. That night, I returned to my room, my mind buzzing with thoughts of Maurice. I couldn't shake the feeling that he was close, that he was waiting for me to uncover the rest of his story. As I prepared for bed, I found myself standing in front of the mirror again, staring at the spot where his handprint had appeared the night before. I waited, half expecting to see it reappear, but the mirror remained clear. I sighed, wondering what else I could do. How could I help a spirit that had been trapped for so long? What did he want from me? I climbed into bed, the weight of exhaustion pressing down on me, but sleep didn't come easily. My mind raced with questions and possibilities, my body tense as I listened for any sign of Maurice's presence. And then, in the stillness of the night, I heard it, the soft sound of footsteps padding across the floor, My heart leapt into my throat as I sat up, straining to hear more. The footsteps stopped at the foot of my bed, and for a moment there was only silence. But then I felt it, a tug on the blanket, light and playful, like a child trying to get my attention. "Are you there?" I whispered, my voice barely audible. For a long moment, there was nothing. Just the silence of the room, the faint hum of the city outside. And then the whisper came, "Play with me." It was the same voice from the night before, soft and pleading. But this time it wasn't distant. It was close, too close. I swallowed hard, my hands trembling as I reached for the bedside lamp, but before I could switch it on, something brushed against my leg. It was cold, weightless, but unmistakable, the touch of a small hand. I froze, my breath catching in my throat as the room seemed to close in around me. Maurice was here, in the room with me, and he wanted me to play his game. But I didn't know what that game was, and the thought of finding out terrified me. The room grew colder, and I could feel his presence growing stronger, the air thick with something I couldn't see. I squeezed my eyes shut, trying to block it all out. But the voice came again, this time more insistent. "Play with me." The whisper echoed in my mind, sending chills down my spine. I didn't know what to do. How do you respond to a ghost, especially one who's been waiting for over 100 years? My pulse quickened as I finally found my voice. "I'll play with you," I whispered, my voice shaky and unsure. "But you have to tell me what happened to you." The coldness in the room seemed to shift, as though Maurice was considering my words. For a long moment, there was nothing but silence. I opened my eyes and the room was still. No movement, no shadows, just the empty space where his presence had been moments before. I sighed, feeling the tension leave my body as I realized that whatever had been there was gone now. The air had warmed slightly, and the oppressive feeling had lifted. But the sense of unfinished business lingered. I needed to understand more. Maurice wasn't just looking for someone to play with. He wanted something, perhaps closure, perhaps a way out of the limbo he was trapped in. But how could I help him find peace? The next morning, I sought out Martin, the ghost tour guide. If anyone knew more about the ghost child and how to deal with spirits like him, it would be Martin. I found him in the lobby, preparing for another group tour, his black trench coat as dramatic as ever. "Martin, I need to talk to you," I said, approaching him with urgency. He raised an eyebrow, clearly intrigued by my intensity. "Let me guess. You've had a run-in with one of our more permanent residents?" "It's the ghost child," I said, glancing around to make sure no one was listening. "I think his name is Maurice Adams. He's been interacting with me." Martin's expression grew more serious, and he motioned for me to follow him to a quieter corner of the lobby.
Maurice has been here a long time, longer than most of the spirits that haunt this place. He's harmless for the most part, but he's lonely, and sometimes that loneliness makes him persistent.
I nodded, my mind racing with everything I had learned. Is there a way to help him? To make him move on? Martin hesitated, his gaze drifting toward the grand staircase that led to the upper floors.
Spirits like Maurice are trapped between worlds. They stay because they're tied to something, an unfinished task, a lost connection. If you can find out what's keeping him here, you might be able to help him move on. But that's easier said than done.
I sighed, feeling the weight of the responsibility settle over me. Do you know anything about what happened to him? Why he disappeared? Martin shook his head.
The details have been lost to time. The hotel's management doesn't like to dwell on its darker history. But if Maurice has chosen you, there's a reason for it. He trusts you in his own way.
I swallowed hard, realizing the gravity of the situation. Maurice had reached out to me for help, and now it was up to me to find a way to give him the closure he needed. That night, I sat in my room, staring at the mirror, waiting for a sign. I didn't know how I was going to help Maurice, but I knew I had to try. The ghost child was lost, and I was the only one who could help him find his way home. As the hours ticked by, the room grew colder, and the familiar sense of dread settled over me once again. But this time, I wasn't afraid. I was ready. The soft sound of footsteps echoed in the hall, and I knew Maurice was coming. The game wasn't over yet. The story of Maurice haunted me, but it wasn't the only presence lingering in the halls of the Hotel Monteleone. The Blue Lady, with her air of melancholy and loss, had been as much a part of my journey through this hotel as the ghost child. After seeing her in the hallway that night, her misty figure standing at the far end of the corridor, silent and sorrowful, I couldn't shake the image from my mind. There was a heaviness to her that made her presence different from Maurice's. Where Maurice was playful, reaching out for companionship, the Blue Lady felt weighed down by something deeper, something far more tragic. I knew I needed to learn more about her, about why she wandered the halls in that flowing blue gown, waiting for a lover who, according to legend, had never returned. I couldn't help but feel a strange connection to her, as if her sorrow were something that the hotel itself was amplifying, pulling me toward her. After my conversation with Martin about Maurice, I decided to return to the library in the hotel and delve further into its records. This time, my focus was on the Blue Lady. I spent hours poring over old records, photographs, and news clippings, hoping to find some mention of her story. The legend of the Blue Lady had been passed down for generations, one of the most famous ghost stories tied to the Monteleone. But, as with all legends, the truth was buried beneath layers of myth and speculation. The most common version of the story was that the Blue Lady had been a guest of the hotel in the early 1900s, a woman named Adelaide Beaumont, whose husband was a sailor. The two were deeply in love, according to the reports, and Adelaide would wait for him at the hotel whenever he returned from sea. But one fateful trip, he never came back. Adelaide's heart had broken, they said, and she had died in the very hotel where she had waited so long for him. Since then, her spirit had been seen wandering the halls, dressed in her signature blue gown, searching for the man who had promised to return to her. As I read through the accounts of her appearances, I began to notice a pattern. Guests who had encountered her described a similar experience, a feeling of deep sadness, a weight that seemed to press down on them when she was near. Some had even reported hearing her sobs in the middle of the night, soft and mournful, echoing through the walls of the hotel. The more I read, the more I realized that her story wasn't just one of heartbreak. It was one of unresolved grief. She wasn't simply searching for her lost love. She was trapped in that moment of waiting, unable to move on, because the closure she so desperately needed had never come. I closed the last of the books with a sigh, leaning back in my chair as I tried to process everything I had learned. Adelaide Beaumont's sorrow was palpable, even now, more than a century after her death. I couldn't imagine what it must have been like for her, waiting in vain for someone who would never return, her heart slowly breaking until it stopped altogether. But I knew one thing for sure: she hadn't moved on, and just like Maurice, her spirit had reached out to me, whether I wanted it or not. That evening, as I walked through the halls of the hotel, I couldn't help but feel the weight of her sorrow pressing down on me. It was as though the hotel itself had absorbed her grief, and now it radiated through the very walls. The Blue Lady wasn't just a ghost. She was a presence, a lingering reminder of the pain that had once filled these halls. I made my way up to the 9th floor, my footsteps slow and deliberate as I approached the spot where I had seen her the night before. The air was cold, colder than it had been downstairs, and I felt the familiar chill of the hotel's spirits settling over me like a heavy cloak. As I stood at the end of the hallway, staring at the empty space where the blue lady had once stood, I felt a strange sense of anticipation, as though she was waiting for me to acknowledge her. "Adelaide," I whispered, testing the sound of her name on my tongue. For a moment, there was nothing but silence. The air was still, the hotel eerily quiet. But then I heard it, a soft, mournful sob, echoing from somewhere nearby. My heart raced as I turned, trying to locate the source of the sound. The sobs grew louder, more distinct, as if they were coming from right beside me. I felt my chest tighten with an overwhelming sense of grief, as though her sorrow was flooding into me, filling me with her pain. And then, out of the corner of my eye, I saw her, the blue lady. She stood at the far end of the hall, just as she had the night before, her head bowed, her figure shimmering faintly in the dim light. This time, though, there was something different about her. Her shoulders shook with silent sobs, her entire body radiating a sense of loss that was almost unbearable. My heart ached as I watched her, the weight of her sorrow pressing down on me like a physical force. I took a step forward, my voice barely a whisper. "Adelaide." Her head snapped up, and for the first time I saw her face. She was beautiful even in death, her pale skin framed by dark, cascading hair. But her eyes, they were filled with a sadness so deep that it made my chest tighten with emotion. She looked at me, her gaze intense and full of longing, as though she were searching for something I couldn't give her, but I wanted to. I wanted to help her find peace, to release her from the endless waiting that had trapped her here for so long. "I'm sorry," I whispered, though I wasn't sure what I was apologizing for. "I'm so sorry." She didn't respond. Instead, she began to move, drifting slowly toward me, her gown trailing behind her like mist. The closer she came, the heavier the air became, until it felt as though I was suffocating under the weight of her grief. I wanted to reach out to her, to offer her some kind of comfort, but I didn't know how. What could I possibly say to a woman who had waited for over a century for a man who would never return? As she drew nearer, I felt her sorrow wash over me in waves, each one stronger than the last. It was as though she was trying to share her pain with me, to make me understand the depth of her loss. "I can't help you," I whispered, my voice trembling. "I don't know how." Her eyes locked onto mine, and for a brief moment, I saw something in them, something more than just sadness. There was a flicker of hope, of longing, as though she believed that I could somehow give her the closure she so desperately needed. I swallowed hard, my mind racing. What was I supposed to do? How could I help her move on when I didn't even fully understand why she was still here?
"Please, help me."
Her voice was soft, barely audible, but the desperation in it was unmistakable. I felt tears sting my eyes as I nodded, even though I didn't know what I was agreeing to. "I'll try. I'll help you." Her figure shimmered, her form becoming less distinct, as though the promise I had made had given her some small measure of peace. But as she began to fade, I heard her voice again, softer this time, almost a whisper.
"He never came back."
And then she was gone, her presence fading into the shadows of the hotel, leaving me alone in the cold, empty hallway. I spent the rest of the night pacing my room, unable to sleep. Adelaide's sorrow lingered in the air, her plea for help echoing in my mind. I had told her I would help her, but I had no idea how. How could I give her the closure she needed when the man she had waited for was long dead? The next morning I returned to the library, determined to learn more about Adelaide Beaumont and the sailor she had loved. If I could uncover the truth about what had happened to him, maybe, just maybe, I could help her find peace. After hours of searching, I finally found a lead, an old newspaper article from 1908. The article described a shipwreck off the coast of New Orleans, a tragedy that had claimed the lives of several sailors. Among the names listed was James Beaumont, Adelaide's husband. My heart sank as I read the details. James had never returned because he had died at sea, his body lost to the waves. Adelaide had waited in vain, not knowing that her lover would never come home. And now, more than a century later, she was still waiting, trapped in the moment of loss that had defined her death. I felt a deep sadness for her, knowing that there was nothing I could do to bring James back to her. But perhaps by showing her the truth, by helping her understand what had happened, I could help her move on. Maybe that was what she needed, to know that the waiting was over. That night, I stood in the hallway again, calling out to her. "Adelaide," I whispered, hoping she could hear me. "I know what happened to him. He's gone. He's not coming back." The air grew cold, and I felt her presence before I saw her. She appeared at the far end of the hall, just as she had before, her eyes filled with the same sorrowful longing. I took a step toward her, my heart pounding in my chest. "You don't have to wait anymore. He's gone, but you can find peace." Her eyes met mine, and for a long moment, there was only silence. And then slowly her form began to fade, the sadness in her eyes giving way to something else, something that looked like acceptance. "I'm sorry," I whispered again, my voice shaking. "I'm so sorry." And then she was gone. The air felt lighter after Adelaide's final appearance, as though the hotel itself had exhaled, releasing a burden it had carried for over a century. There was an eerie quiet on the 9th floor now, the heavy sorrow that had once pressed down on me every time I walked those halls noticeably absent. I knew that helping her had been the right thing to do. She had found some measure of peace, and though I wasn't entirely sure how I'd been able to help, I was relieved to see her spirit finally leave. But while Adelaide had found her way out of the hotel's grasp, I still felt the weight of another presence, Maurice. The child's playful but insistent spirit remained in the halls, and with each passing day, I felt his connection to me growing stronger. His laughter, the handprints on the mirror, the whispers, they were constant reminders that I hadn't yet finished what I'd started. Maurice was still waiting for me to solve the mystery of his disappearance. I returned to the hotel's library, determined to find more about his life and his death. The guest ledger had provided me with his name and the date of his disappearance, but the details had been scant, and the official records I'd found left many questions unanswered. There had to be more. I could feel it, lurking just beneath the surface. The library's quiet hum wrapped around me as I combed through the old hotel archives once more, looking for anything I might have missed. I scoured the newspaper clippings, old blueprints and guest records, hoping to uncover a clue. But after hours of searching, I was left with little more than speculation and half-formed theories. Frustration gnawed at me. I couldn't shake the feeling that the hotel was hiding something, that there were layers to its history that had been deliberately obscured. But by whom and why? Just as I was about to give up for the day, I noticed a stack of old maintenance logs tucked away in the corner of the archive room, covered in dust and forgotten. Curiosity piqued. I opened the first logbook, flipping through the brittle pages. Most of the entries were mundane, plumbing issues, minor repairs, but then something caught my eye. October 1921. Strange noises reported in the walls on the 9th floor. Maintenance unable to locate the source. I paused, staring at the entry. It was dated just 3 years after Maurice had gone missing. My pulse quickened as I continued reading. October 1922. Guests report strange occurrences in room 930. Child's laughter heard late at night, though no children are staying on the floor. I felt a shiver run down my spine. This was it. Maurice had begun haunting the hotel almost immediately after his disappearance. The reports continued over the years, each one eerily similar: laughter in the middle of the night, objects moving on their own, and guests waking up to find child-sized handprints on the mirrors. But none of the entries provided any explanation for what had happened to him. The mystery of his disappearance remained unresolved, even after all this time. I leaned back in my chair, rubbing my temples as I tried to piece it all together. Maurice hadn't left the hotel, that much was clear. But why? What had happened to him? And why was his spirit so tied to me? Later that evening, I found myself back on the 9th floor, pacing the hallway outside room 930. The reports I'd read earlier weighed heavily on my mind, and I couldn't shake the feeling that the answer to Maurice's disappearance was hidden somewhere within the hotel itself. I stopped in front of room 930, hesitating for a moment before pressing my hand against the door. I hadn't been inside this room since the tour, but now, standing here in the silence of the evening, I felt an overwhelming urge to enter. The door creaked open slowly, revealing a room much like my own, tastefully decorated with a large bed, a writing desk, and a mirror on the far wall. But the air was different here. It felt colder, heavier, as though the very walls were holding their breath, waiting for something to happen. I stepped inside, closing the door softly behind me, and immediately felt a presence. It was subtle at first, just a shift in the air, but it grew stronger with each passing second. I turned toward the mirror, expecting to see another handprint or some other sign of Maurice's presence. But the glass was clear. I waited, my heart pounding in my chest, listening for any sign of the boy's spirit. The room was eerily quiet, the kind of silence that makes your skin prickle with anticipation. And then I heard it. A faint whisper coming from somewhere behind me. I turned slowly, my breath catching in my throat, as I saw the figure of a small boy standing near the window. His outline was hazy, as though he were made of mist, but I could see him clearly: the tousled curls, the old-fashioned clothes, and the sad, distant expression on his face. "Maurice," I whispered, my voice barely audible. The boy didn't respond. He just stood there staring at me with those wide, sorrowful eyes. I took a tentative step toward him, my heart pounding in my chest. "I want to help you," I said softly, "but I need to know what happened. Why are you still here?" For a long moment, Maurice didn't move. But then slowly, he lifted his hand, pointing toward the far corner of the room. I followed his gaze, my eyes narrowing as I tried to understand what he was showing me. There, in the corner of the room, was a small, ornate door, something I hadn't noticed before. It was low to the ground, barely reaching my knees, and painted to match the walls. I approached it cautiously, my fingers trembling as I reached for the handle. The door creaked open, revealing a narrow, dark passageway leading into the wall. My heart raced as I peered inside, trying to make sense of what I was seeing. It looked like an old service tunnel, maybe something used by maintenance staff long ago. But why would Maurice be pointing me toward it? I glanced back at the boy, but he was gone. The room was empty once more, the air still and silent. I knew I had to go inside. The passageway was cramped and musty, the air thick with the scent of dust and decay. I crawled forward, using the light from my phone to guide the way. The tunnel seemed to stretch on forever, winding through the walls of the hotel like a hidden artery. I couldn't help but wonder how many others had walked these same passages, unaware of the secrets they concealed. As I made my way deeper into the tunnel, the air grew colder, and I felt an overwhelming sense of dread creeping over me. Something was waiting for me at the end of this passage. I could feel it. Finally, after what felt like hours, I emerged into a small, hidden room. It was dark and claustrophobic, with low ceilings and walls covered in peeling wallpaper. But what caught my attention was the object in the center of the room, a small wooden trunk, old and covered in dust. I approached the trunk slowly, my hands trembling as I lifted the lid. Inside, I found a collection of old, worn toys, wooden blocks, a stuffed bear, and a small tin soldier. My heart sank as I realized what I was looking at. These had belonged to Maurice. But why were they hidden away here in this forgotten room? I reached deeper into the trunk, my fingers brushing against something cold and metallic. I pulled it out, my breath catching in my throat as I saw what it was, a small locket, tarnished with age. I opened it carefully, revealing a tiny photograph inside. It was a picture of Maurice, smiling up at the camera with wide, innocent eyes. And beside him, a woman, his mother. My heart ached as I stared at the photograph, 1,000 questions racing through my mind. Why had this been hidden away? What had happened to Maurice after he disappeared? As I held the locket in my hand, the room grew colder, and I felt a presence behind me. I turned slowly, expecting to see Maurice. But instead, there was another figure, a man, tall and shadowy, standing in the doorway. My blood ran cold as I realized who it was. This wasn't Maurice. It was someone else, someone darker. The figure standing in the doorway was shrouded in darkness, its presence filling the small, hidden room with an oppressive, suffocating energy. My breath caught in my throat as I stared at the shadowy silhouette, my heart pounding so hard I was sure it would burst from my chest. This wasn't Maurice. The playful, innocent energy of the ghost child was nowhere to be found in this figure. No, this presence was something else, something darker, more sinister. I clutched the locket in my hand, feeling the cold metal bite into my palm as I backed away from the shadow. My mind raced, trying to make sense of what I was seeing. Who was this? Why were they here in this forgotten corner of the hotel watching me? The figure didn't move. It simply stood there, its form shifting slightly in the dim light, as though it were made of smoke or mist. I felt an overwhelming sense of dread wash over me, my body screaming at me to run, to get out of that room as fast as I could. But I was frozen in place, trapped by the malevolent energy radiating from the figure. For a long, agonizing moment, we stood there in silence, the only sound my ragged breathing and the faint creaking of the old floorboards beneath my feet. And then, just as suddenly as it had appeared, the figure began to fade, dissolving into the shadows until it was gone. The room fell silent once more, the oppressive energy lifting slightly, but the fear remained. My hands were shaking as I tucked the locket into my pocket and made my way back through the narrow passageway, my mind racing with questions I couldn't answer. Who or what had that been? And why had it appeared just as I was uncovering more of Maurice's past? Back in my room, I sat on the edge of the bed, clutching the locket as though it held all the answers I needed. The discovery of the hidden room, the old toys, and the photograph of Maurice with his mother had only deepened the mystery. Why had those items been hidden away? What had happened to Maurice that had left him trapped in the hotel for over a century? And more importantly, who was the shadowy figure I had seen? The hotel had always been haunted, that much was clear. But until now, the spirits I'd encountered had been tied to specific tragedies. The Blue Lady's lost love, Maurice's disappearance. This new presence, however, felt different. It wasn't tethered to grief or sadness. It was something darker, more menacing. I spent the rest of the evening trying to piece together the puzzle, flipping through old photographs and newspaper clippings I'd collected, hoping for some clue that would explain the malevolent force I had encountered. But no matter how much I searched, the answers eluded me. The hotel's history was murky, its secrets buried beneath layers of forgotten stories and half-remembered tragedies. The hours ticked by, and as the night deepened, the familiar sense of unease returned. The air in the room grew colder, and I felt the now familiar chill creep over my skin. I knew that something was coming. The spirits of the Monteleone had grown restless, and it was only a matter of time before they made themselves known again. And I was right. It began with the sound of footsteps, soft and deliberate, echoing through the hallway outside my room. I froze, my breath catching in my throat as the sound grew louder, closer. The footsteps stopped just outside my door, and for a moment, there was only silence. Then, a soft knock. I stared at the door, my heart racing. This wasn't the playful knock I had heard before, the one that had signaled Maurice's presence. This knock was different, more deliberate, more insistent. I stood, my hands trembling as I crossed the room and reached for the doorknob. I hesitated for a moment, my fingers hovering over the cold metal, before finally pulling the door open. The hallway was empty. I stepped out into the corridor, glancing both ways, but there was no sign of anyone. The lights flickered slightly, casting long, eerie shadows across the carpet, but the floor was silent. And yet, I couldn't shake the feeling that I wasn't alone. As I stood there, listening to the quiet hum of the hotel, a cold breeze brushed past me, sending a shiver down my spine. The air felt charged, as though the hotel itself was alive, watching me, waiting for something to happen. I turned to go back into my room, but before I could close the door, I heard it, a faint whisper, barely audible, coming from somewhere down the hall. "Help me." The voice was soft, almost pleading, and it sent a chill through my body. I knew that voice. It was Maurice. Without thinking, I followed the sound, my footsteps echoing through the empty corridor as I made my way toward the end of the hall. The voice grew louder, more insistent, as though Maurice was calling out to me, begging me to follow him. "Help me!" I stopped in front of room 930, the door slightly ajar, the soft glow of the hallway lights spilling into the dark room beyond. My heart pounded in my chest as I pushed the door open, stepping inside. The room was dark, the curtains drawn tight against the night outside, but I could feel Maurice's presence, heavy and thick in the air, as though he was standing right beside me. "Maurice," I whispered, my voice trembling, "what do you want me to do?" For a moment, there was only silence, and then the whisper came again. "Help me." I turned toward the mirror, expecting to see his handprint, but the glass was clear. The room felt colder now, the air thick with something I couldn't quite place. And then I heard it. A soft, rhythmic thumping, like the sound of something hitting the wall. I turned toward the sound, my eyes narrowing as I realized it was coming from behind the mirror. I approached cautiously, my fingers brushing against the cold surface of the glass. The thumping continued, steady and insistent, as though something or someone was trying to get out. I hesitated for a moment before reaching up and pressing my hand against the mirror. To my shock, the glass shifted slightly, as though it were loose in its frame. I tugged at the edge and the mirror swung open, revealing a dark, narrow space behind it, a hidden passageway. My heart raced as I peered inside, the faint glow from my phone barely illuminating the cramped space beyond. The thumping grew louder, echoing through the walls, and I knew I had to go inside. I climbed through the opening, my breath catching in my throat as I crawled through the narrow passageway. The air was thick with dust, and the walls seemed to close in around me. But I kept going, drawn forward by the sound of the thumping. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, I emerged into another small room, similar to the one I had found earlier. But this room was different. There were no toys, no signs of Maurice's presence. Instead, The room was filled with strange symbols, carved into the walls and floor. Candles, long since burned out, lined the corners of the room, their wax melted into twisted, distorted shapes. And in the center of the room, a large wooden door. The thumping was coming from behind it. I approached slowly, my hand trembling as I reached for the handle. The air was thick with the scent of decay, and I could feel the oppressive energy growing stronger with each step. As I opened the door, the thumping stopped, and then I saw him. Maurice. He was standing in the center of the small, dark room, his face pale and drawn, his eyes wide with fear. But there was something wrong, something different about him. His form seemed incomplete, as though he were flickering in and out of existence. "Maurice?" I whispered, stepping toward him. He didn't respond. He just stood there, staring at me with those sad, hollow eyes. And then, before I could reach him, the door slammed shut behind me, trapping us both in the darkness. The darkness pressed in around me, thick and suffocating, as the door slammed shut behind me. My heart raced, my breath quickening in panic as I tried to orient myself in the pitch-black room. The air was cold and damp, carrying a faint smell of decay that clung to my senses. I could feel Maurice's presence nearby, though I could no longer see him. He was there, watching, waiting, his small figure lingering just out of reach. "Maurice," I called softly, my voice trembling. "Where are you?" No answer, only the oppressive silence broken by the distant sound of my own rapid breathing. I fumbled for my phone, trying to cast even a faint glow into the darkness, but my fingers shook so badly that I dropped it. The soft thud of the phone hitting the floor echoed eerily in the enclosed space. I knelt down, blindly feeling for the phone, when I felt something brush against my hand, cold and small, a child's hand. I froze, my skin prickling with fear. "Maurice." I swallowed hard and whispered, "Maurice, what happened to you?" The small hand pulled away, and I heard the sound of footsteps moving deeper into the room. I followed, driven by some invisible force that pulled me toward him. I couldn't leave him like this. Not after everything I'd uncovered. I needed to know. I needed to help. Suddenly, the air shifted, and the temperature plummeted even further. I felt the cold settle deep into my bones, and the oppressive sense of dread returned. Stronger, heavier than before. The malevolent force I had encountered earlier was back. Something was wrong. The atmosphere was charged with an unseen energy, and the hairs on the back of my neck stood on end. Maurice wasn't the only spirit in this room. Something darker was lurking in the shadows, watching, waiting for the right moment to strike. My breath caught in my throat as I felt the presence move closer. The sense of malice was overwhelming, filling the room with an icy weight that pressed down on my chest. I could feel it now, the figure I had seen before, the dark presence that had haunted the hotel long before I arrived. This was no ordinary ghost. I needed to get out. But as I turned back toward the door, a sudden wave of dizziness washed over me, and I stumbled, collapsing against the cold stone wall. My vision blurred, and for a moment I felt like I was being pulled out of myself, as though something was trying to drag me deeper into the dark, into whatever horrors lay beyond. And then, without warning, the world around me shifted. I was no longer in the small, hidden room. The cold, damp air was gone, replaced by the warm, dry scent of wood and polished brass. I blinked, trying to make sense of my surroundings. I was standing in the grand lobby of the Hotel Monteleone, but it wasn't the Monteleone as I knew it. This version of the hotel was different, older. The chandeliers above me gleamed brightly, their crystals reflecting the warm glow of the gas lamps lining the walls. The lobby was filled with people, elegantly dressed in clothes from another era, women in long gowns and men in sharp suits. It was as if I had been transported back in time. My heart pounded in my chest as I looked around, trying to make sense of what was happening. Was this a vision, a dream, or something else entirely? I stepped forward, my footsteps silent on the polished marble floor, and moved toward the grand staircase that swept up toward the second floor. As I walked, the people around me didn't seem to notice me. It was as though I was invisible, a ghost among them. And then I saw him. Standing at the base of the staircase, holding the hand of a tall, elegant woman, was Maurice. He looked exactly as he had in the photograph, wide-eyed and innocent, with his tousled curls and old-fashioned clothes. The woman beside him, who I could only assume was his mother, smiled down at him, her face filled with warmth and love. I wanted to call out to them, to warn them of what was to come, but I found that I couldn't speak. My voice was trapped in my throat, and all I could do was watch as the scene unfolded. Maurice and his mother began to climb the staircase, their figures graceful and elegant as they ascended toward the upper floors. But as they reached the top, something changed. The warm, inviting atmosphere of the hotel shifted, darkening as a shadow fell over the lobby. The people around me continued to chat and laugh, oblivious to the growing sense of dread that filled the room. I looked up and saw him. At the top of the staircase, standing in the shadows, was the same dark figure I had seen before, the malevolent presence that had haunted the hotel. He loomed over the scene, his face obscured, his form shrouded in darkness. And then, slowly, he began to descend the stairs, his gaze fixed on Maurice. My heart raced as I watched, unable to move, unable to stop what was happening. The closer the figure came, the more the air seemed to grow thick with malice, and I could feel Maurice's terror, his confusion as the shadow approached. Maurice let go of his mother's hand, turning to face the dark figure. His small body trembled with fear, but he didn't move. He didn't run. He was frozen in place just as I was, trapped by the overwhelming presence of the shadow. And then, in an instant, the figure reached out, his hand wrapping around Maurice's small arm, and the boy disappeared. The scene dissolved around me, and I was plunged back into darkness. I gasped for air, my body jerking as I was pulled out of the vision. I was back in the small, hidden room beneath the hotel, my head pounding and my heart racing. The oppressive energy of the dark presence was still there, lingering in the corners of the room. But I could feel Maurice's spirit as well, frantic, afraid, calling out to me. It wasn't an accident. Maurice hadn't simply disappeared from the hotel that day. He had been taken, claimed by the dark force that haunted the Monteleone. But why? I reached for the locket in my pocket, gripping it tightly as I tried to steady my breathing. The locket, the hidden room, the dark figure. It was all connected. Somehow, the hotel was tied to this dark presence, and it had claimed Maurice all those years ago, trapping him within its walls. But why was I involved? Why had Maurice reached out to me specifically? I wasn't just another guest passing through. There was a reason I had been drawn to the Monteleone, a reason Maurice had chosen me. I felt a cold shiver run down my spine as the realization hit me. I wasn't just a visitor here. I was connected to this place, to these spirits, in ways I had never imagined. The pull I had felt toward the hotel, the way the spirits had reached out to me, it wasn't random. There was something in my past, something buried deep within my family's history, that tied me to the Monteleone. I could feel it now. A distant memory tugging at the edges of my mind, something I had long forgotten, or perhaps something I had never known. I needed answers. I needed to understand why I was here, why Maurice had chosen me to help him, and what role I played in the dark history of the hotel, and I knew there was only one person who could give me those answers. Later that night, I found Martin in the hotel bar, nursing a glass of whiskey as he sat alone in a quiet corner. His usual air of theatrical mystery seemed diminished, as though the weight of the hotel's secrets had finally taken its toll on him. He looked up as I approached, his dark eyes narrowing slightly as he gestured for me to sit.
You've seen it, haven't you? The shadow.
I nodded, my throat tight. I saw it take Maurice. I saw the hotel. But it was different, older. Martin sighed, rubbing a hand over his face.
The hotel has always been haunted. But there's something else here. Something darker. I've seen it too. It's been here since the beginning, feeding off the energy of this place, trapping the souls of those who can't move on.
But why me? I asked, leaning forward. Why was I drawn here? What's my connection to all of this? Martin hesitated, his gaze distant as though he were searching for the right words.
You're not just a guest here. The Monteleone has always been tied to the people who come through its doors. Some are drawn here because they're connected to the spirits that haunt it. Others?
He paused, his eyes locking onto mine.
Others are tied to the history of the hotel itself. I think you fall into the latter category.
I frowned, confused. What do you mean?
Your family. There's something in your family's history, something tied to the Monteleone. I don't know the details, but I've seen it happen before. People like you. They come here, and the spirits latch onto them. They're drawn to you because you're part of this place, whether you realize it or not.
My heart raced as his words sank in. Could it be true? Could my family be tied to the dark history of the Monteleone? And if so, what did that mean for me?
I don't know how deep it goes. But if you want to find out the truth, you need to keep digging. The hotel has a way of revealing its secrets to those who are willing to look. But be careful. The deeper you go, the more dangerous it becomes.
I nodded, my mind spinning with the implications of what Martin had told me. I had come to the Monteleone seeking answers, and now I was beginning to understand just how much was at stake. Maurice's fate, the dark presence that haunted the hotel, my own connection to this place. It was all part of a larger puzzle, one that I was only just beginning to piece together. And I had a feeling that the answers I was searching for were far more terrifying than I had ever imagined. Martin's revelation about my family's possible connection to the Hotel Monteleone left me reeling. I had come to the hotel out of curiosity, seeking a brush with the supernatural, but now it seemed I was tied to this place in ways I could never have imagined. The spirits that haunted the Monteleone, the playful but lost Maurice, the sorrowful blue lady, and the dark presence that lurked in the shadows. They weren't just ghosts I had stumbled upon. They were part of my story, too. But if that was true, if I was somehow connected to this place and its tragedies, I needed to understand how. And more importantly, I needed to figure out how to stop the dark force that had claimed Maurice's life and continued to haunt the hotel's halls. There was only one person who could help me now, Marie Laveau. It was late by the time I left the hotel, the streets of New Orleans bathed in the soft, golden glow of streetlights. The French Quarter hummed with life, tourists and locals alike drifting in and out of the bars and restaurants, their laughter and music filling the air. But I felt none of the warmth of the city's charm. Instead, I felt the weight of the Monteleone's secrets pressing down on me, pulling me deeper into its mysteries. I made my way toward St. Louis Cemetery No. 1, the final resting place of Marie Laveau. Her legend was well known throughout New Orleans, the most powerful voodoo queen the city had ever seen, feared and respected by all. Even in death, she commanded the same reverence, with visitors leaving offerings at her tomb in the hopes of receiving her blessings. But I wasn't seeking her favor. I was seeking her help. I arrived at the cemetery just as the gates were closing, slipping through quietly as the night deepened around me. The cemetery was eerily still, the whitewashed tombs casting long shadows in the moonlight. My footsteps echoed softly on the cobblestone path as I made my way toward Marie Laveau's tomb. When I reached it, I paused, my heart racing in my chest. The tomb was simple but powerful, its surface covered in hundreds of X's, drawn by visitors seeking the voodoo queen's favor. Candles and offerings were scattered around the base, coins, flowers, and even small bones left as tokens of respect. I took a deep breath and knelt in front of the tomb, placing my hands on the cool stone. I had no idea what I was doing, no idea if she would answer me, but I had no other choice. "Marie Laveau," I whispered, my voice trembling slightly. "I need your help." The wind stirred gently, rustling the leaves of the nearby trees. The night was still, the air heavy with the scent of the city's age and history. For a long moment, nothing happened, and I began to wonder if my plea had gone unheard. But then I felt it, a shift in the air. The temperature dropped, and a faint chill crept over my skin. The cemetery, once quiet, seemed to pulse with energy, as though something unseen was moving through it. I stood slowly, my heart racing, and turned to find her. Marie Laveau stood just a few feet away from me, her figure shimmering in the moonlight, as though she were made of mist and shadow. Her dark eyes were fixed on me, and though her expression was calm, there was an undeniable power in her gaze, something ancient, something far beyond the scope of the living. My breath caught in my throat. She was as intimidating as the legends said, but there was something else, something almost familiar about her presence. I had seen spirits before in the Monteleone, but this was different. Marie Laveau wasn't bound by the same rules. She wasn't trapped like the others. She had chosen to remain, to walk among the living and the dead as she pleased. I took a step toward her, my voice barely a whisper. "I need your help. I've been seeing things, spirits in the Hotel Monteleone. There's something dark there, something that's hurting people, trapping them." Marie didn't move. She simply watched me, her eyes narrowing slightly as though she were assessing me, weighing my words. "I think I'm connected to it somehow," I continued, my voice growing stronger. "To the hotel, to the spirits. I saw what happened to Maurice, the little boy. He was taken by something dark, and I don't know why, but I need to know. I need to stop it." For a long moment, Marie was silent. The wind continued to stir around us, the air heavy with anticipation. And then, slowly, she spoke.
"You seek answers to questions that are not easily given,"
she said, her voice low and melodic, filled with the weight of years.
"The Hotel Monteleone is a place of power, a place where the lines between the living and the dead blur. It has always been so."
Her words sent a shiver down my spine. I knew she was right. I had felt that power from the moment I stepped into the hotel. It wasn't just haunted. It was a place where the past and present, the living and the dead, coexisted in ways I hadn't fully understood until now.
"But there is more,"
she continued, stepping closer.
"You are tied to that place, as is your blood. The spirits that reach out to you, they do so because you carry the weight of your ancestors' actions. The darkness that haunts the Monteleone is not just a spirit. It is a curse."
"A curse?" I repeated, my throat tightening with fear. "What kind of curse?" Marie's dark eyes bore into mine, and I could feel the weight of her words as she spoke.
"The Monteleone was built on a foundation of pain. Your ancestors were involved in something that called forth the dark spirits that now haunt the hotel. They summoned it, knowingly or not. And now, that darkness claims those who are connected to it."
My heart pounded in my chest as her words sank in. My family. My bloodline was responsible for the curse that haunted the hotel. Maurice, the Blue Lady, and all the other spirits, they were trapped because of something my ancestors had done. "But why Maurice?" I asked, my voice trembling. "Why did it take him?" Marie's expression softened slightly, though her eyes remained intense.
"The boy was innocent, But his presence in that place made him vulnerable. The dark spirit feeds on fear, on sorrow. It claimed him because it needed to, and now it lingers, waiting for more.
My stomach twisted in knots as I realized the full extent of what she was saying. The dark presence in the Monteleone wasn't just a ghost. It was a force, a curse that fed on the emotions of the living, drawing them into its grasp. "What can I do?" I asked, my voice barely a whisper. "How do I stop it?" Marie stepped closer, her figure towering over me as she spoke.
The darkness cannot be banished easily. It was called forth with intention, and it can only be undone by confronting the source. You must find the object that ties the curse to the Monteleone. It is hidden deep within the hotel, in a place where the living dare not go. Once you find it, you will have the power to break the curse.
I swallowed hard, my mind racing. What is it? What am I looking for?
A relic, an object of power that was used to summon the spirit long ago. It is hidden in the bowels of the hotel, in the darkest places, where the spirit's power is strongest. But be warned, it will not let you take it easily. The dark spirit will fight to protect what is its own.
I nodded, my heart pounding in my chest. I knew what I had to do, but the thought of going deeper into the Monteleone, into the heart of its darkness, filled me with dread. The dark spirit had already claimed Maurice, and I had seen firsthand how powerful it was. But I couldn't let it continue. I couldn't leave the hotel with that curse still hanging over it, still claiming the lives of the innocent. Marie's eyes softened slightly, and for the first time, I saw a hint of warmth in her expression.
You are strong, stronger than you know. Trust in your instincts, and the spirits will guide you, but be cautious. The darkness will test you. It will try to break you.
I nodded again, my resolve hardening. I won't let it win. Marie nodded, a faint smile touching her lips.
Good, now go. The spirits are waiting for you.
I turned to leave, but before I could take a step, Marie's voice stopped me.
Remember, once you confront the darkness, there is no turning back.
I swallowed hard, understanding the gravity of her words. I had come too far to turn back now. The Monteleone's curse needed to be broken, and I was the only one who could do it. With a deep breath, I left the cemetery, the weight of Marie Laveau's words heavy on my shoulders. I had the answers I needed, but the path ahead was more dangerous than I had ever imagined. The Hotel Monteleone was waiting for me, and so was the darkness. The streets of New Orleans blurred as I made my way back to the Hotel Monteleone. My thoughts tangled in the revelation Marie Laveau had given me. A curse, my family, the dark presence that had claimed Maurice, the one that still lurked within the walls of the hotel. It had all been set into motion long ago, long before I had ever stepped foot in this place. The weight of that knowledge pressed down on me as I crossed the threshold into the hotel. The grand lobby, with its glittering chandeliers and polished marble floors, felt different now. The opulence, the charm, it was all a facade, hiding the dark, twisted history that pulsed beneath the surface. I knew what I had to do. Marie had said the relic, the object that tied the curse to the Monteleone, was hidden deep within the hotel, in the darkest places where the spirit's power was strongest. I had seen glimpses of those dark places already, hidden passageways, secret rooms. But I knew there were more secrets waiting for me in the bowels of the hotel. And now I had no choice but to go deeper, to confront the darkness head-on. The elevator ride to the 9th floor was silent, the soft hum of the machinery doing little to calm the growing sense of dread in my chest. I knew the dark spirit was aware of me. I could feel its presence in the walls, in the air. It was watching, waiting for me to make my move. As I stepped out into the hallway, the familiar cold settled over me, and I shivered despite myself. The hotel was alive, shifting around me as though it knew what I was about to do. I could feel Maurice's presence too, lingering just at the edges of my perception. He was waiting for me, just as he always had been. I made my way down the hall, my footsteps slow and deliberate, until I reached room 930, the room where Maurice's fate had been sealed. The door was slightly ajar, as if it had been expecting me. I stepped inside, the cold air wrapping around me like a shroud. The room was dimly lit, the curtains drawn tight against the outside world. But it wasn't the room itself that drew my attention. It was the mirror, the same mirror Maurice had led me to before, the one that concealed a hidden passageway. I approached the mirror, my heart pounding in my chest as I reached out to touch its cool surface. For a moment, I hesitated, wondering if I was truly ready for what lay beyond. But there was no turning back now. I had come too far. With a soft click, the mirror swung open, revealing the narrow passageway behind it. The air inside was cold and musty, the scent of decay clinging to the walls. I stepped through the opening, my phone's flashlight casting a faint glow ahead of me as I made my way deeper into the hidden tunnels of the hotel. The passage twisted and turned, its walls narrowing as I descended into the depths of the Monteleone. The deeper I went, the stronger the sense of dread became. I could feel the dark presence growing, its power pulsing through the walls like a heartbeat. It knew I was coming for it. Finally, after what felt like hours, I emerged into a small, dark chamber. The air was thick with the scent of damp stone and something else. Something darker, more sinister. In the center of the room, illuminated by the weak beam of my flashlight, was an old wooden chest. My pulse quickened as I approached the chest, my hand trembling as I reached for the latch. This was it, the relic that had bound the curse to the hotel, the object that had called forth the dark spirit so many years ago. I took a deep breath and opened the chest. Inside, resting on a bed of tattered fabric, was a small, ornate box covered in intricate carvings. The symbols etched into the wood were unfamiliar, but I could feel the power emanating from them. This was the source of the curse, the object that had called forth the dark spirit and trapped Maurice's soul in the hotel. I reached for the box, but before my fingers could touch it, the air in the room shifted, the temperature plummeted, and the oppressive weight of the dark presence filled the chamber, pressing down on me like a physical force. The shadows around me deepened, and I could feel the spirit closing in, its malice radiating through the air. I took a step back, my heart pounding in my chest as the darkness gathered, coalescing into a shape, a tall, imposing figure that loomed over me, the same figure I had seen before, the one that had taken Maurice. My breath caught in my throat as I stared up at it, my mind racing. This wasn't just a spirit. It was something more, something ancient and dangerous, born of the curse that had bound it to the hotel. Its form was shrouded in shadow, its features indistinct, but I could feel its power, its hatred radiating toward me. "You can't have it," I whispered, my voice trembling as I backed away from the chest. "I won't let you take any more." The dark figure didn't speak, but I could feel its presence pressing against me, suffocating me with its malice. It wasn't just after the relic, it was after me. It wanted to claim me, just as it had claimed Maurice. I swallowed hard, my hand reaching for the locket in my pocket. I clutched it tightly, feeling the cold metal bite into my palm as I stood my ground. "I'm not afraid of you," I said, though my voice wavered. "You can't have me." For a moment, the dark figure hesitated, as though my words had given it pause. And then, slowly, it began to move toward me, its form shifting and twisting as it reached out with shadowy fingers. I braced myself, my heart racing. I could feel the weight of the curse pressing down on me, the darkness closing in, but I wasn't going to let it win. Not this time. With a surge of determination, I reached into the chest and grabbed the ornate box. The moment my fingers closed around it, the air in the room seemed to explode with energy. The dark figure recoiled, its form flickering as though the power of the relic had burned it. But it wasn't retreating. It was angry. The shadows around me deepened, and I could feel the spirit's power growing stronger, feeding off the fear in the room. I stumbled back, clutching the box to my chest as the figure lunged toward me, its shadowy form reaching for me. And then, just as the darkness closed in, I heard it. A child's laughter. It was soft at first, almost a whisper, but it grew louder, filling the room with its innocent sound. Maurice. The dark figure froze, its form flickering as the laughter echoed through the chamber. I could feel Maurice's presence, his spirit pushing back against the darkness, refusing to let it claim me. The power of the curse weakened for a moment, and I seized the opportunity. "I'm not afraid of you," I shouted, holding the box high. "I'm going to break this curse," the dark figure hissed, its form unraveling as Maurice's laughter filled the air. The shadows twisted and writhed, but they couldn't touch me. Maurice was protecting me. With a final burst of energy, I ran for the passageway, clutching the relic tightly as I escaped the chamber. The dark presence followed, but it was weaker now, its power fading as Maurice's spirit held it at bay. I didn't stop running until I reached the surface, the weight of the hotel's curse pressing down on me the entire way. I burst through the door into the lobby, gasping for breath as I collapsed against the wall. The ornate box was still clutched in my hand, its power humming faintly beneath my fingers. I had done it. I had found the relic that tied the curse to the Monteleone. But the battle wasn't over yet. Now, I had to find a way to destroy it. I clutched the ornate box to my chest as I stood in the lobby, my breath coming in ragged gasps. The weight of the hotel's curse seemed to press in from all sides, and I could still feel the dark presence lingering in the shadows, watching, waiting. Though I had escaped the chamber below, I knew that I hadn't escaped the curse itself. Not yet. The relic, the small box I had taken from the hidden chamber, was the key to everything. It pulsed faintly in my hands, humming with an energy that was both ancient and dangerous. This was the object that had called forth the dark spirit, the thing that had bound the spirits of the hotel to their fates. And now it was in my possession. But what was I supposed to do with it? How could I break the curse that had been set in motion so many years ago? I knew I couldn't do this alone. I found myself wandering the halls of the hotel once again, the ornate box tucked safely in my bag as I tried to make sense of my next steps. Maurice had helped me, his laughter pushing back the darkness in that final moment. But the hotel wasn't just haunted by him. There were other spirits here too, spirits who had been waiting for years, trapped by the curse just as Maurice had been. And one of those spirits was the Blue Lady. I had seen her wandering the halls, her sorrowful presence filling the air with a palpable sadness. She too had been waiting for her lost love, waiting for a release that had never come. Just like Maurice, she had been trapped here, bound to the Monteleone by the dark forces that had been unleashed so long ago. I had to help her. I had to free her. But first, I had to understand what had bound her to this place. I spent the next several hours combing through the hotel's records once again, searching for anything that might give me a clue. Adelaide Beaumont, who had come to be known as the Blue Lady, had been a frequent guest of the hotel in the early 1900s. She had always stayed in the same room, waiting for her lover to return from sea. But when he didn't come back, she had wasted away in the hotel, her heart broken, her spirit lost. As I dug deeper into the records, I found something that made my pulse quicken. There was an entry about Adelaide from the hotel's logbook dated shortly after her death, a note about her belongings being cleared from her room. Among them had been a small carved figure, a keepsake her lover had given her before he left on his final voyage. The figure had been placed in the hotel's storage room, where it had remained ever since, a relic, just like the one I had found for Maurice. I felt a surge of hope. If I could find that figure, if I could return it to Adelaide, I might be able to help her move on, just as I had promised her before. It was the key to releasing her from the curse, the thing that had tied her to this place for so long. I made my way to the hotel's basement storage room, a musty, dimly lit space filled with old furniture, paintings, and objects that had been forgotten over the years. The air was thick with dust, and the smell of age clung to everything. It was a graveyard of memories, each object a relic of a past that had been left behind. I searched through the piles of boxes and trunks, my heart racing as I dug deeper into the forgotten items. Finally, after what felt like hours, I found it. A small carved wooden figure, worn smooth from years of handling. It was simple but beautiful, depicting a sailor standing at the bow of a ship, his gaze fixed on the horizon. This was it, the keepsake Adelaide's lover had given her, the object that had bound her to this place. I held the figure in my hands, feeling the weight of it as I made my way back up to the 9th floor. The hotel was eerily quiet, the air heavy with anticipation, as though it was waiting for me to take the next step. When I reached the end of the hallway, I saw her, the Blue Lady. She stood there, just as she always had, her figure shimmering faintly in the dim light. Her dark hair cascaded down her back, and her blue gown trailed behind her like mist. But this time, there was something different about her. Her shoulders were hunched and her face was turned away, as though she were bracing herself for something. I stepped forward, the carved figure clutched tightly in my hand. "Adelaide," I called softly. She didn't move, but I could feel her presence growing stronger, her sorrow more palpable than ever. "I found it," I said, holding up the figure. "The keepsake your lover gave you, the one he left behind." Slowly, she turned to face me, her eyes wide with disbelief. For the first time, I saw a flicker of hope in her expression, hope that had been buried beneath years of waiting and heartache. I stepped closer, holding out the figure to her. "He's gone, Adelaide, but you don't have to wait for him anymore. You can move on." Her gaze dropped to the figure in my hand, and I saw a tear slip down her pale cheek. She reached out, her hand trembling as she touched the wooden figure, her fingers brushing against mine. For a moment, I felt the weight of her sadness, the depth of the grief that had kept her tied to this place for so long. And then, something shifted. The air around us seemed to lighten, the oppressive weight that had clung to the hotel lifting slightly as the Blue Lady's form began to shimmer, her edges blurring. Her sorrowful expression softened, and she gave me a small, grateful smile before she began to fade, her form dissolving into the air like mist on a breeze. I stood there, alone in the hallway, the wooden figure still in my hand, as the last trace of Adelaide Beaumont disappeared into the night. She was free. I returned to my room, my mind buzzing with what had just happened. The Blue Lady, Adelaide, had finally moved on. She had been freed from the curse that had bound her to the Monteleone for so many years, and I had been the one to help her do it. But my journey wasn't over yet. Maurice was still waiting. His spirit had protected me in the depths of the hotel, but I knew that he too was bound by the curse. And if I was going to free him, if I was going to break the curse once and for all, I would have to confront the dark spirit that had claimed him. The ornate box I had taken from the hidden chamber was still in my bag, humming faintly with its strange energy. I knew it held the key to everything, the final piece of the puzzle. But destroying it wouldn't be easy. The dark spirit wouldn't let me take it so easily. I had freed the Blue Lady. Now I had to free Maurice. The ornate box hummed faintly in my hands as I sat in the dim light of my room. The weight of everything I had learned pressing down on me. The spirits I had encountered, the Blue Lady, Maurice, and the others, had all been tied to this curse, trapped in the Hotel Monteleone by a force beyond their control. And now I knew the truth, that my family, my bloodline, had played a role in creating the curse that had bound them here. It was time to end it. It was time to break the curse that had haunted the Monteleone for so long. I stood and slipped the ornate box into my bag, the relic that Marie Laveau had warned me about, the object that had summoned the dark spirit, the one that still held sway over the hotel's haunted halls. Marie had told me that I had to destroy it, but she had also warned me that the spirit would fight to protect what was its own. The air in the hotel seemed heavier than before, as though the very walls were holding their breath, waiting for what would come next. I could feel the presence of the dark spirit lingering in the shadows, watching, waiting for the moment when it would strike. But I was ready now. I had faced the Blue Lady's sorrow, and I had begun to understand Maurice's pain. I wasn't just another guest passing through the hotel's haunted halls. I was part of its story, and I was determined to finish it. I made my way to the grand staircase, my footsteps echoing softly on the polished marble as I descended toward the lobby. The air around me felt charged, alive with an unseen energy that made the hairs on the back of my neck stand on end. The hotel was waiting for me, and I knew that whatever happened next, I would be facing the full force of the dark spirit's wrath. As I crossed the lobby, I could feel the eyes of the hotel's ghosts on me. The spirits I had glimpsed before, the shadowy figures, the fleeting shapes that flickered at the edges of my vision, were more present now, their presence tangible. They weren't just memories of the past. They were aware, watching as I prepared to confront the dark force that had held them captive for so long. I wasn't alone. I could feel Maurice's presence close by, his spirit lingering just at the edge of my perception, as though he were waiting for me to take the final step. I approached the elevator and pressed the button for the basement, the lowest level of the hotel, the place where the spirit's power was strongest. The elevator doors slid shut with a soft hiss, and I felt a cold shiver run down my spine as the car descended, carrying me deeper into the heart of the Monteleone. The basement was dark, the air thick with the scent of mildew and age. The lights flickered faintly, casting eerie shadows across the concrete walls. This was the oldest part of the hotel, a place that had seen decades of forgotten history. It was here that the curse had taken root, spreading through the hotel's halls and trapping the spirits that lingered within its walls. I stepped out of the elevator, the ornate box clutched tightly in my hands. The energy in the room was oppressive, like a weight pressing down on my chest. The dark spirit was here, and it was waiting for me. The basement was a labyrinth of narrow corridors and low ceilings, filled with old storage rooms and forgotten spaces. I moved through the shadows, my heart pounding in my chest as I searched for the source of the curse, the place where the dark spirit had been summoned so long ago. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, I found it. In the center of the basement, hidden behind an old rusted door, was a small chamber. The air inside was cold, colder than anywhere else in the hotel, and the walls were covered in strange symbols, carvings that seemed to pulse with a dark energy. This was the heart of the curse, the place where the ritual had been performed. I stepped into the chamber, my breath catching in my throat as I felt the full weight of the spirit's power pressing down on me. The shadows around me shifted and twisted, coalescing into the same dark figure I had seen before, the malevolent presence that had haunted the Monteleone for over a century. It loomed before me, its form flickering in and out of existence, its face obscured by shadow. I could feel its hatred radiating toward me, an ancient anger that pulsed through the air like a living thing. I held up the ornate box, my hands trembling as I stared down the dark figure. "This is what you want, isn't it?" I said, my voice shaking. "The relic that ties you to this place." The dark spirit didn't respond, but I could feel its energy intensify, the air around me growing colder, sharper, as though the spirit was preparing to strike. But I wasn't afraid. Not anymore. "I'm going to destroy it," I said, my voice growing stronger. "I'm going to break this curse." The spirit hissed, its form flickering violently as it moved closer, but I stood my ground. I could feel Maurice's presence behind me, his spirit lending me strength as I prepared for what came next. With a deep breath, I raised the box high above my head and threw it to the ground. The moment the box shattered, the air in the chamber seemed to explode with energy. A deafening roar filled the room, and the dark spirit writhed in agony, its form twisting and contorting as the power that had bound it to the hotel began to unravel. The symbols on the walls glowed with a blinding light, and I felt the curse breaking, the dark energy that had held the hotel in its grip for so long finally beginning to fade. The spirit let out one final ear-piercing scream before it dissolved into nothingness, its form disintegrating into the air like smoke. The curse was broken. I stood there, gasping for breath as the chamber grew still, the oppressive weight of the dark spirit finally lifting. The air around me was lighter now, clearer, and I could feel the presence of the hotel's ghosts beginning to fade. The spirits that had been trapped here for so long were finally free. I turned and saw Maurice standing in the doorway, his small figure bathed in the soft glow of the fading light. He smiled at me, his eyes filled with gratitude, and I felt a wave of emotion wash over me. I had done it. I had freed him. "Thank you," Maurice whispered, his voice barely audible. I nodded, my throat tight with emotion. "You're free now, Maurice. You can go." He smiled one last time before his form began to fade, dissolving into the air like the others. The sadness that had once clung to him was gone now, replaced by a sense of peace that I hadn't seen before. And then, just like that, he was gone. The hotel was quiet when I returned to the lobby, the air light and still. The presence of the ghosts, the dark energy that had once filled the Monteleone, was gone. The curse had been broken, and the spirits were finally at rest. I stepped outside into the cool night air, feeling the weight of the past lift from my shoulders. The Monteleone, once haunted by the ghosts of its tragic history, had finally been freed from the darkness that had bound it for so long. I had come to the hotel seeking a ghost story, but I had found so much more. I had found a connection to a past I hadn't known existed, a curse that had haunted my family for generations. But now it was over. As I walked down the quiet streets of New Orleans, I couldn't help but feel a sense of closure. The Hotel Monteleone had been freed, and so had I. The cool breeze of the New Orleans night gently brushed against my skin as I stood outside the Hotel Monteleone, gazing up at the grand facade. The lights of the French Quarter twinkled in the distance, a stark contrast to the weight I had carried in those haunted halls. Now, the heaviness had lifted, the oppressive energy, the spirits, the curse, they were all gone. For the first time since I arrived, the hotel felt peaceful. I took a deep breath, my chest expanding with a sense of freedom I hadn't felt since I first set foot inside the Monteleone. The curse that had bound the spirits, tied so deeply to the tragedies that had unfolded there, was finally broken. And as I stood there, I felt the presence of those spirits, Maurice, Adelaide, and even the others I hadn't met, fade into the background of the city's pulse, slipping into a peaceful rest. But I couldn't shake the sense of loss that accompanied the triumph. Yes, the spirits were free, but the sadness of their stories lingered in my heart. I had learned so much about them, their lives, their sorrows, and the love that had kept them tied to this world. Now they were gone, and in a way, I felt like I was saying goodbye to friends. The next morning, the lobby of the Monteleone was as grand and bustling as ever. Guests moved about, suitcases wheeled behind them, the scent of fresh coffee filling the air. It all felt strangely normal, as if the events of the past few days had only been a dream. But I knew better. The hotel had changed, even if no one else could sense it. I approached the front desk to check out, my suitcase in hand. The young woman at the desk smiled warmly, completely unaware of the dark history that had once gripped the hotel.
Checking out?
She asked brightly. I nodded. Yes, I think it's time. As she clicked through the computer, my mind wandered. What would become of the Monteleone now? Without the ghosts, without the hauntings, would it still hold the same allure for those who sought its mysteries? I had come here for a ghostly adventure, and while I'd certainly found one, I was leaving with something much deeper, an understanding of the spirits that had lingered here, and of my own connection to the hotel. When I had first arrived, I hadn't known that my family's past was so entwined with the Monteleone's history. But now I understood. My ancestors had been part of the curse's creation, perhaps unknowingly, and in a way I had come full circle by breaking it. I had helped right the wrongs of the past, and now the spirits, along with my own restless curiosity, could finally rest. As I collected my final receipt from the desk, I felt a strange pull, as if the hotel wasn't quite ready to let me go just yet. I glanced back toward the grand staircase, remembering how I had first seen Maurice standing there, waiting for someone to understand his story. The image of his wide eyes and innocent smile flashed in my mind, and I couldn't help but feel a pang of sadness. He was free now. They all were. I turned and made my way toward the door, my footsteps echoing softly against the marble floor. But just as I reached for the door handle, I paused. Something tugged at the back of my mind, a presence, faint but familiar. I turned, scanning the lobby, half expecting to see one of the spirits still lingering. And then, in the corner of the room, I saw her, the Blue Lady. She wasn't fully there, just a faint, shimmering outline, her blue gown trailing behind her like a whisper of mist. She looked at me, her eyes filled with the same sorrowful longing I had seen before, but now there was something else. Peace, gratitude. I smiled softly and nodded to her, knowing that this was her final farewell. And then, just as she had appeared, she was gone. As I stepped out onto the busy streets of the French Quarter, the world seemed to come alive around me. The sounds of jazz music and the chatter of tourists filled the air, but I felt strangely detached from it all. The journey I had been on, the spirits I had encountered, the curse I had broken. It felt as though I had been part of something otherworldly, something that had shifted my perspective on life and death. I walked down the street, the Hotel Monteleone growing smaller behind me with each step, and I couldn't help but reflect on the strange twists of fate that had brought me here. I had come seeking a ghost story, a thrill. Instead, I had found a connection to the past, to the spirits trapped in time, and to my own family's dark history. But more than anything, I had found purpose. I had helped free souls that had been trapped for over a century, lifting the weight of the curse that had haunted this place for generations. It was over now. The spirits could rest, and so could I. I took one last glance back at the Monteleone, its grand facade gleaming in the morning light. The hotel was alive with activity, but its dark history, its ghosts, had finally been laid to rest. I turned and walked away, knowing that I would never forget the souls I had encountered within those haunted walls. Maurice's laughter, Adelaide's sorrowful gaze, and the dark spirit that had once haunted the hotel. They would all stay with me, part of a story that had finally come to an end. But as I moved through the vibrant streets of New Orleans, I felt something else too. Hope. The ghosts of the Hotel Monteleone had been freed, and in their release I had found my own sense of peace.